Okay, our next session is going to be Rasmus. He's going to he's going to be talking about how is AI driving Web3 applications and their impact on sustainability. What role does AI play in the enhancing sustainability? Is that working?
Yeah, I think so.
Excellent, superb. Over to Rasmus.
Thank you. Can I switch with this one? Can I work through this? Or yeah, I can. Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Rasmus Häggkvist, and I will be talking to you today about how AI is driving Web3 applications and their impact on sustainability. So I think the panel before talked a lot at the end about sustainability, so I'm really happy that we could kind of segue over to this section. So a little quick introduction about me. So my name is Rasmus Häggkvist. I am the project leader of AI Gen. AI Gen is a vocational education community, global community, where we help Generation Z, that's the younger generation below the millennials, and Generation Alpha, which is even younger than that, to gain the key access and the knowledge about how to leverage AI in their future work, so that they can be prepared for the future of the job market, essentially. This is just a quick picture of me with His Majesty the King of Sweden. I was nominated as one of the top leaders in Sweden under 25, top 100 entrepreneurs under 30, and I also drive an education channel on TikTok with 100,000 followers. Just really about technology and how to leverage it. So quick crash course on AI in case, actually, how many people here feel like they have a good understanding of artificial intelligence? We have a few, nice. Just a quick crash course on AI. You probably heard a lot about generative AI in the recent year, and that's probably because of ChatGPT. And this is different, sort of, from discriminative AI. So generative AI is essentially you train a model on something, and then you make it produce something that's kind of similar. Sort of like how you can take a picture of a dog and create a animated version of that dog. You've seen this with a lot of text-to-image models like DALL-E. But then you also have discriminative AI. This is like the old school stuff. You learn to discriminate between, for example, is this a dog, is this a cat? And it says yes or no. And also in predictive models, so regression models, for example, trying to predict outcomes of certain, for example, in financial markets. So that's all over on the discriminative side, but actually it's a bit more fluid than that, because you can get generative AI models to produce discriminative tasks sometimes. So there's a bit of a crossover going on there. But moving into sustainability in AI and how that can drive into Web3 applications, we see, depending on the study that you read, so I study neuroscience and statistics at University College London, so I like to reference to some studies, and I'm going to do so throughout this presentation. It is predicted that the global share that ICT holds in terms of electricity demand will increase to up to 2030 by, depending on the study, actually some of the most conservative studies say 2 to 5 times, but some say that it's going to increase by 20x. So some studies say that we currently have about 1% of global electricity share, some say 5%, and they're going to predict it to up to 20%, some of the more extreme estimates, which is really important to understand then that 1/5 of all electricity demand might be in this sector, and we have to consider this. But there are also opportunities. Some studies showcase that up to $5.2 trillion could be gained from developing sustainable ICT technology. And we could actually reduce 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 with the utilization of AI and implementation of it into ICT technologies. But what's really interesting is that when people talk about AI, they're really scared about the jobs. We're going to lose our jobs. I think people really realize that we might actually get killed by the AIs, and they kind of accepted that in reality. And now everyone's scared about losing their jobs instead. But some studies actually point to that net We're going to create 38.2 million more jobs than what we're losing from the development of artificial intelligence agents. Traditionally, economic growth has been correlated to greenhouse gas emissions, and we try to decouple this, as you can see, by increasing the actual GDP, but also decreasing the emissions, which is really the aim here for sustainable development in the technology sector. And I wanted to showcase some case studies to showcase how we can do it, for example, environmental monitoring. So the GEMS air pollution monitoring platform you might have heard of got released by UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, and AirIQ, Swiss startup, where they take over 25,000 parameters across the world. They measure air quality, and then they use predictive models to be able to focus on, okay, what kind of air quality are we going to have in an hour in this city at this time. You might have seen pictures from New York after all of the fires in Canada on how air quality was problematic because of all the fires. This is something that these programs actually can predict, and you can take measurements and measures to make sure that people are being safe and they're not being exposed to bad particles. And why is this important from an infrastructure perspective? Well, being able to monitor different parameters using AI models is a way for us to be able to predict problems before they arise. Not only are we able to monitoring and after bad things happen, bad events like leakages, like wastage, we are able to fix it, but we actually be able to predict. That's really where we can gain sustainable development. Another case study I wanted to point out is the EY Opschain ESG. How many saw that announcement a month ago? I don't know if anyone saw it. It's essentially carbon tracking on-chain, immutable. And I think it's pretty cool because now that we're seeing that you're able to verify and track carbon emissions, then you can start thinking about how can we actually utilize that data, analyze it, and I think generative models are going to come into play here, because if you have a bunch of data that you can utilize and actually analyze, you can start doing things with it. You can start promoting that data and showcasing this is what we're doing, this is what we have been doing for years, and you can start thinking about where you're going to go next. I wanted to talk to you about open data and personalization because, actually let me take a step back even further. When you think about how to implement AI into your current business, it's an emerging technology. We're already thinking about a very new technology with web3, and trying then to overlap even a newer technology, you're starting to get a lot of risk here because you have really complicated systems. You're trying to make them work together, and you're exposing yourself for a lot of risk. Instead, try to think about utilizing AI into your business from a more mundane perspective. I'm saying mundane, I don't mean to be pessimistic here, but try to utilize AI in things that you already see that you're capable of. For example, if you have data, you have internal data, like surveys, forms, project evaluations. All of this is data that you can utilize and you can analyze using generative AI. You can categorize it, and you can have that ready for the next time you want to, for example, create a new project. You can see, okay, what teammates work the best. How can I improve this project depending on what I'm trying to get out of it. Otherwise, it's just siloed. And I know we're talking a lot this day about how to make sure that we don't have siloed data, we're reusing data, and we're trying to be interoperable. I mean, that's one of the big aspects of Web3. But it's really complex, and there's going to be places where you actually can't really, for example, make one part of one unstructured data being moved into a different part of your application because that output is not formatted correctly. So how many people here use ChatGPT, like quite regularly, quite a few of you, right? And you see it's quite creative in how it outputs, for example, an answer. So you ask it some question or you try to make it write something. It will be quite creative and sometimes not do quite what you want it to do. And you have to go back and forth for quite a few times before it actually does the things you want to do. That is still a problem, even if you want to, for example, make two systems talk to each other and you want to get one data piece of data come into the other system because you want to format it in a way which fits your system. But there are going to be issues sometimes where it doesn't really produce the format that you want it to, because it's going to have a bit of creativity, it's going to have a bit of hallucinations, and there's often not a lot of room for errors when it comes to that sort of transfer. So I think actually what we're going to see really, truly from an environmental and sustainability aspect, both socioeconomically as well, where AI can be implemented. This is something people don't really think about when they think decentralization. I mean, this is not the most interesting aspect from a tech perspective, but it's one of the most important parts when you're thinking about productivity. Decentralization also really could mean on a geographical scale as well. We all like, most of us like remote working. We like to be able to pull talent from anywhere across the world. We see the potential in geographic decentralization, but the sad truth is that AI, unless used properly, is actually going to increase global inequality. So we're going to see recruitment being affected by AI, and if you don't think about the data you're providing your AI with, you're going to actually end up creating more global inequality. You're going to have less talent to use from. Less people are going to know how to do your job properly because you're not training them well enough. And as technology advances and we need more technical knowledge and we need more skill intense workers, we're actually decreasing our global talent pool, which is at the end of the day hurting our businesses. So it's really important to think about when we're utilizing AI how we make sure that we don't exclude different people, because when you have a vast pool of talent, bias decreases, you get better workflow, it goes on and on and on. Now, AI integration guide for businesses. So first of all, think about your current problems that you're facing in business. And think about, do you need generative or discriminative AI? Or do you just sprinkling, as we heard before, sprinkling AI on top of different systems for the sake of using another buzzword? We've seen it before. It doesn't really help us. Because the truth is, if you're just training more models and you're using more energy for something that doesn't really make sense, then you're actually counterproductive in your progress towards sustainability. And try to maximize also AI utility. Avoid silos. Think about how you can utilize different AI agents to make them communicate to each other. Make sure that you have interoperability in the sense that, I can use that data for this, and then I can actually use it for something else. You have a trained model. Think about what you can actually utilize it, so that you don't retrain a bunch of models for no purpose at all. That you could be able to reutilize it in different contexts. And what I want to talk about, I'm going to spend a lot of time on this chart, so don't worry. This is a really interesting graph. For me, this is one of the most interesting graphs that have ever been created in terms of AI and sustainability. This is the positive impacts identified on the global sustainability goals, and these are the potential negatives of AI. And you can see that the positives of implementing AI outweigh the negatives in a far majority. And what is also really interesting is where we see the negatives coming from. We see it on sustainability goal 1, 4, and 10. 1, 4, and 10, if you don't know, 1 is poverty, 4 is education, and 10 is inequalities. So inequalities in the sense of economic, social, between countries and individuals. We don't see it so much on environment, global effect. We don't see it as much as water or energy. we see really rarely, but we actually see a lot of benefits here. So what I think is really important to take away from the current developments in AI and how you can utilize AI properly is make sure that you get training for your employees so that they're able to utilize AI in a meaningful way, and that they're able to then later train other people, and we get this network, we get this like tree of people getting trained in artificial intelligence, and make sure that we actually enable people to do jobs rather than losing them. And also making sure that the data that we're providing these models with is equitable, that it is appropriate, that it is distributed, that it's representable for the different markets that we want to introduce our models to. You can't just train something, for example, on a data set on, let's say, people who work in England and then expect it to work the same in Indonesia. There's cultural context that AI might actually inhibit, which is a real issue, and you see it's one of the strongest ones. And the same goes for the poverty line. When we think about AI systems and we think about what we're doing with information technology, we might not think about that this technology is going to spread across the world. We might just like to think about what we're doing here in the UK. We like to think about what we're doing here naturally, but information and communication technologies is something that we need to spread across the globe to be able to enable people to rise above poverty levels and to be able to actually provide their talent to the world, and together we can globally fight these issues, these global issues around sustainable development, and being able to introduce people to work with AI, simple vocational work, is something that really needs to be taken care of, because we can see a potential negative aspect is this poverty issue from bringing in AI into the workforce. So this is really important. I just wanted to highlight for you that focus on education, focus on training, train models with appropriate data, make sure that it's responsibly sourced, and have in mind from every single point you're introducing artificial intelligence of how are you using it, what data are you using, and how is this going to move forward to avoid these potential negative low tail ends issues. And that was it, really. Thank you, everyone. I can take questions if you have any in terms of implementing artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Have you got any questions? Does anybody have any questions for Rasmus?
So the question was the pain points currently in hiring and recruiting in AI, and what we can see is there's arguments to be made that we need to provide good and equal data, but also we have to think about the engineers that we put behind the systems, because there's an argument to be made that inherent bias from the engineers that we're using to create models might actually perpetuate their own biases into the system. But it's really hard to make that claim because we don't actually know. It's hard to reverse engineer the outputs that we get from our data models. So that's one issue that people are concerned with at the moment, and people are trying to safeguard themselves by simply trying to hire more females and also non-binary people in as AI engineers. But also, what was really interesting is finding talent from different cultural perspectives. Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to go global and you're trying to, on a global scale, utilize, for example, text analysis, you're going to have a model that understands different contexts in different countries. And fine-tuning a model in that way, which is contextual to the country you're in, is really difficult. And that's why you have to almost have people that can spot those issues. Because if you don't, then that's sort of like a unknown people are very scared of at the moment. That's what I see most companies talk about it at the moment.
Any more questions?
So on that topic, how do you look at debiasing data and tackling that, especially when it comes to inequality?
It's a good question. And what we currently see is that we're almost, if you look at the so I'm going to again talk about generative models just because that's what most people are looking into now for example text analysis or data analysis. And we're starting to run out of parameters to train our models on, and people are scraping the internet very unresponsibly across every single data point that they can get a hold of, regardless if it's proprietary information or not, which is an issue, but we're starting to run out of data. So actually what we're now starting to see is that people don't look so much at the initial training data, but the fine-tuning. So when you provide context to the models, that's when you actually can provide a smaller sample, think about curate the data properly, and in that fine-tuning part of the training process, that's when you can look at the different. My recommendation personally is looking at the different subsections of the global sustainability goals. So you have the 17, but then they split into subsections. And then you look at, okay, how is my training data now comparing to these goals? How is this potentially affecting each subsection? Is it an inhibitor or an enhancer? This study I showed, which is number 1, the role of artificial intelligence in achieving sustainable development in Nature, published. They actually have a meta-analysis on this if you want a reference for that, to help think about that data collection. Good question.
Are there any more further questions? No. Okay. Well, I've got a question for you, Rasmus. AI is a very broad term. It runs a lot of different aspects and things. But in situations such as when it's running perhaps critical facilities or critical missions of what, security can become a big problem. So if perhaps we're running, say, a data center, for instance, and the people running the data want to run so much data through it's going to raise the temperature of the servers by up to 35 degrees, but the facility owner or manager doesn't want that to run for various reasons. And you're talking about a team of people, you're training underneath you, all have access to the AI functionality in the system. How do we manage that security?
It's a good question in terms of thinking about who we let in on the training of models and who is responsible for the models we use. But I want to clarify one quick thing is that I don't mean to give everyone in your organization access to your most critical functions. I mean that you want to make sure that the upcoming entry-level talent has enough understanding to be able to do their jobs correctly as job descriptions change and as talents need to be utilized at potential different AI at different levels, at different scales, so that you actually have a talent pool coming in that they're actually useful in 10, 15 years. So it's more on a general scale that you want to train those people rather than actually putting them in critical positions, utilizing that model. But then as far as I understand your concern is that if you have something that's really critical and you want to implement AI to take care and potentially monitor that system, that can be quite dangerous if it doesn't go well, if you don't have any other security measures or any other alarm systems.
So do you think that in those situations, the organisation should be employing somebody like a CISO as the only person who can actually give authority for another person to actually access the AI functionality and data.
I think it depends on a company's priorities. Sometimes you might want to have a council of people that vote on how to implement your system, and some people prefer a more democratic process of how they run an organization. Some like this more military style top-down, but that creates obviously a center point of failure in terms of the organizational structure. What happens if they leave or something otherwise bad happens to them?
Okay, all right. Have we run out of questions? One more question. Excellent.
What are your thoughts on open sourced trained models?
I think open source is fundamentally really interesting, and I really enjoy open source personally. I think also that training models on non-proprietary data and I think that's very ethical in a sense. I think that if you don't care about the data you're using to train the models, you just go ahead and scrape the whole internet, tape social media pages, you take potential breach databases in the way because that was a file somewhere that you just took along. That's troubling. For me personally, I can't really point to any cases that's been made so far where convictions have been made because people have done so. But I personally think that thoughtfully scrape data and open source available models is a good way to go.
Excellent. Do we have any further questions? Okay, I'd like to thank Rasmus Häggkvist.
Yep, thank you.